Many of us might have seen movies or read books or comics on the Norse mythology. Movies like Thor the Avengers, who starred the gods Loki and Thor. Others may have heard of the brand Norse. So although the Norse mythology is of ancient origin, the world has not yet forgotten about it. In this clip, the characteristics of the Norse mythology will be looked at.
Background information. The Norse mythology was practiced by the northern regions of the world, including Scandinavia, Norway, Iceland, and the surrounding countries by the Vikings. It is sometimes referred to as the Viking mythology or the Teutonic mythology, and started between the late 8th century and the middle of the 11th century, commonly known as the Bronze Age.
The principal beliefs concerning the origins of the universe. The Norse creation story states how the universe was created, featuring the gods, giants, giantesses, and dwarfs, and all the other forms of life that people, Norse myths, and legends come into being. In the beginning there was nothing but a god called All-Father, who was invisible. The huge abyss of emptiness was called Ginnungagap. Before the world was created, a tree called Yggdrasil, the world tree, was made, which would link all the 9 worlds together. Under one of its roots to the south was a realm called Muspelheim, which was made up of fire. Its embers floated down into Ginnungagap. Another root held the realm Niflheim, a land of mist and darkness made up of ice. Under this realm was Helgelmir. This realm supplied the waters for 12 huge rivers. The waters and rivers flowing down from the realm escaped into Ginnungagap, making great blocks of ice. As the flames of Muspelheim dropped into the blocks of ice, steam was created, forming the first of the ice giants, the evil Ymir. Along with Ymir, Ordamla the cow was also formed. Ymir refreshed himself at the beginning of every day by drinking from the udders of this cow. The first day of his creation, Ymir slept and formed more frost giants through the sweat of his armpits. The god Buri was melted after 3 days, while Ordamla licked the salty ice to refresh herself. Buri's son Bor married Ymir's daughter Bestla, who fathered the 3 gods Odin, Vili, and Ve. These gods were the enemies of the giants. The 3 brothers could no longer take Ymir's evilness. They decided to kill the giant and succeeded. His blood drowned all the giants but 2 who ran away and continued to breed. As a result of this crisis, the 3 gods were left with crops and decided to create the earth from Ymir's body. His flesh became the land, his blood became the ocean, mountains were formed from his bones, trees were formed from his hair, Ymir's skull made up the vaults of heavens, in which kept the sparks that escaped Muspelheim, which became the sun and the moon, summer and winter, night and day. The sun helped create the first signs of vegetation on the earth. From 2 trees humans were created. Odin breathed life into them, while Vili gave them intelligence and Ve gave them senses. The man was named Ask, meaning ash tree, and his wife was called Embla, meaning elm. From them, the human race was produced. The gods went on to make their own realm called Asgard. At the time of the creation of the world, it was foretold that it would not be eternal. In the end of the battle, everything would be destroyed. The gods, giants, men, and animals would cease to exist.
The principal beliefs of the Norse mythology. The Norse have many beliefs which can be split up into 4 main categories: the universe, their deities, the afterlife, and they believe in nothing is eternal. Universe. The Norse believe the creation of the world resulted when Niflheim and Muspel partly joined together. They also believe that there was 9 worlds all connected by the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Asgard was the land of the gods, Eflin was the land of elves, Venel was the land of Vanir, Midgard was the land of humans, Jotunheim was the land of giants, Severheim was the land of dark elves, Nidvaheim was the land of dwarves, Muspel was the land of fire, and Niflheim was the land of ice. Deities. The gods were highly admired by many as they were the creators of the races and established the different parts of the world. The Vikings believed that the 2 groups of gods, Vanir and Aesir, became one after the victory of Aesir over Vanir during one of their many wars. The pantheon of the Norse had gods whose purposes were all different, having roles in fields such as economic and religion. They ranged from harmonious and peaceful to warlike gods. Afterlife. In most cases, the Vikings' afterlife was determined by the way they died. Niflheim was for the evil, where they would suffer. Valhalla was for those who died in battle. Hell was a place like Earth or Midgard, not a place of punishment. Those who died as sacrifice for the well-being of their tribe or by spear wounds would serve Odin in Valhalla. This would be seen as the greatest honor. To get to these places would consist of a journey. Those which were unsuccessful in finding the correct road became the walking dead. The dead would be chosen by the gods or goddesses to live in Asgard. If not chosen, they'd either stay in their grave or go to hell. Belief of nothing is eternal. The Norse believed nothing really ever was eternal, meaning afterlife was also not eternal. What seems to be beyond hell or Valhalla is rebirth. They also believed that the universe was not eternal. It was believed that it would end at the fight of Ragnarok.
The role of the supernatural powers and deities in the religion. Norse mythology includes the pre-Christian beliefs and legends of the Scandinavian peoples, including those who developed on Iceland, where most of the written sources of Norse mythology were collected. The four of the most important gods were Odin, highest of the deities and king of the deities. He was the god of universal wisdom, war and victory, who was simultaneously wise, kind and cruel. He is also known as the Lord of Spear. He tried anything to gain wisdom. Thor, god of thunder, lightning and storms, Odin's eldest brother. Freya, the Vanir god of fertility, who was the subject of an extensive popular cult. Loki, he was Odin's foster son, the trickster god who was blinded by the gods due to his mischief and malice. The four most important goddesses were Frigga, Odin's favorite wife, queen of the deities, goddess of love and death. She cared for all, especially women and children. Freya was the goddess of sex and later also goddess of war and death. She married the god Od, who deserted her. After being abandoned, she divided her time between mourning his absence and being wicked. Idun was the goddess of spring and immortal youth. She was the daughter of the dwarf Evald and married to the god Bragi. Sif was the goddess who married Thor and had his stepson Alf. The Vikings and their gods admired golden hair, and she was exceptionally proud of hers, so Loki cut it all off while she was asleep. Giants. The giants had more wisdom than the gods since they had been alive longer than them. The four main giants were Mimir, who was known as Memory and was the keeper of Spring of Wisdom, since he had so much wisdom, and Odin loved to be wise. The giant agreed to educate Odin, allow him to become more wise, but in exchange for one of his eyes. Vafthrudr was known as the All-Wise. Hrimthur was the rock giant who built Asgard's walls. Surt was the leader of Muspelheim, the land where the dead would go to suffer.
The relationship between sacred spaces and the belief of the religion. The Norse deities were not always worshipped in temples and holy buildings. They were worshipped in nature as it represented the gods and spiritual realm of Yggdrasil. Here we will discuss the enclosed and outdoor sacred places. Outdoors. The oldest sites of the religious worship were in the open air, in holy groves and meadows, rocks and hillocks, or on the shores of swamps where offerings were thrown. The offerings represented the patron gods. Many places were for specific gods and others were simply holy, which were the dwellings of the gods or spirits. Enclosed. They also worshipped in enclosed areas to surround figures of the gods or sacred objects, separating it either temporarily or permanently from the normal world. Small buildings or areas of farmstead were used for worshipping pagans and for holding cult meetings for the locals. Ceremonies were performed by certain leaders among the Viking community, such as kings.
The principal rituals and their significance for the individual and community. The Norse rituals can be divided into three categories: sacrifices, death, and gods. Sacrifices. The ritual of sacrifice would be known as blood, which could be translated into blessed. Although the Norse weren't bloodthirsty and did not have the virtue of killing, they still had human sacrifice. This was not compulsory and all human sacrifice was done willingly. The Vikings would sacrifice prisoners by hanging them from trees, as it was believed that Odin was crucified on the world tree for 9 nights in hope of gaining more wisdom. In some cases, the Vikings sacrificed animals, maidens, and sometimes kings in hope of bringing a better future harvest and improved well-being for the community. Death. Many rituals were performed on the occasion of death. Some Norse warriors were buried with slave girls, believing that they would become their wives in Valhalla. All were buried in a different way, based on their level in society. Each person would be buried with the goods they would require in the next life. Men would be buried with weapons and tools needed for trade, while women would be buried with jewelry. Food and water was buried with all the deceased. Some warriors would be buried with their horses and dogs. Higher individuals would be buried in wooden chambers, whereas the lower ones would be buried in oval, circular or rectangular pits. Gods. A ritual known as seed was common with the Vikings, which was related to magic. This ritual was taught by the god Freya to Odin, and was used by the Vikings to predict and interpret the signs for positive as well as destructive purposes. The Vikings worshipped the statues of Odin, Thor, and Freya. Horses, dogs, and men were used as sacrifices to these gods. The relationship between the religion and its society. The Vikings can relate to the creation story as they lived in a hard and extreme weather where summer was short and winter was long. Like the female gods who had strong and powerful roles, the Viking women would have the duty of running the village while the men were at sea. This shows that women were not regarded as lower than men, like most ancient societies did. Just like not all gods were fighters, such as Freya and Jord, not all Vikings were warriors. There were many that were either farmers or tradesmen. The Vikings saw the sea of great importance since many of their rituals were done there. Like the burial of the dead. Some graves were made in the shape of a boat, as it was believed the dead would use it to travel to the afterlife.
Other religion provides a distinctive response to the search for meaning. The Norse searched for meaning using a variety of ways, which included sacred texts and rituals. Sacred texts. The Eddas were poetic texts which assisted the Vikings in understanding the world they lived in. This was a world where winter was hostile, food was scarce, and the competition for survival was fierce. The Norse represented their everyday experiences of nature and embodied their most noble ideals of life. The Vikings found meaning in trying to have a positive and fruitful balance of agriculture and war, fertility and battle, of life and death, of tradition and regeneration, taking everything into account of the continuous quest for wisdom and immortality forever. Rituals. The seed ritual helped them predict and interpret the future. Meaning would be found through knowing the future. The rituals done to the dead allowed them to understand the path the dead would take. For example, a warrior who died in battle would mean they would join Odin in Valhalla. Making a grave out of a boat would mean the dead would use it to go to their afterlife. As you can see from this clip, the Norse mythology is a complex one with many deities who play an important role in helping the adherents live everyday life. We hope you have understood the beliefs and the characteristics of the Norse mythology. The end.